right, guys, before we dive into to chapter 6, I wanted to bring your attention to the word or the diction choice here on slide 57, the word mulatter. Now, that is, of course, a word that Twain is using here to refer to mulatto, which in this time period was used to refer to a person of mixed race, somebody who was born to one black parent and one white parent. Now we talk about people being multiracial or biracial, and we don't use this term any longer because it's incredibly offensive and a slur. Well, if we don't ever like Pap, he's going to give us a good reason to not in this particular chapter, and we'll talk about that here in just a moment. So join me here for chapter 6, guys, and we'll stop and chat a couple of times. All right. So at the end of the last chapter, the new judge had tried to reform Pap, and it didn't work. So Pap is still out drunk and acting foolish. Well, pretty soon the old man was up and around again, and then he went for Judge Thatcher in courts to make him give up that money. And he went for me, too, for not stopping school. He catched me a couple of times and thrashed me, but I went to school just the same and dodged him or outrun him most of the time. I didn't want to go to school much before, but I reckon I'd go now just to spite Pap. That law trial was a slow business. Appeared like they weren't ever going to get started on it. So every now and then I'd borrow $2 or $3 off the judge for him to keep from getting a cowhiding. Every time he got money, he got drunk. And every time he got drunk, he raised Cain around town. And every time he raised Cain, he got jailed. He was just suited. This kind of thing was right in his line. Well, he got to hanging around the widows too much, so she told him at last that if he didn't quit using around here, she would make trouble for him. Well, wasn't he mad? He said he would show who was Huck Finn's boss. So he watched out for me one day in the spring, and he catched me. And he took me up the river about 3 miles in a skiff, which is a little boat, and crossed over to the Illinois shore where it was woody, and there weren't no houses, but an old log hut in place where the timber was so thick you couldn't find it if you didn't know where it was. Well, he kept me with him all the time, and I never got the chance to run off. We lived in that old cabin, and he always locked the door and put the key under his head nights. He had a gun, which he had stole, I reckon, and we fished and hunted, and that was how we lived on. Every little while, he locked me in and went to the store 3 miles to the ferry and traded fish and game for whiskey and fetched it home and got drunk and had a good time and licked me. So he's getting drunk, locked Huck in a cabin, and then he's beating him when he gets home. The widow, she found out where I was by and by, and she sent a man over there to try to get a hold of me, but Pat drove him off with a gun, and it weren't long till I was used to being where I was, and I liked it, all but the cowhide part. Again, he doesn't mind living out in the wilderness. It's something he's used to, but he sure doesn't like getting beat. It was kind of a lazy and jolly, laying off comfortable all day, smoking and fishing, and no books nor study. 2 months or more run along, and my clothes got to be all rags and dirt, and I didn't see how I'd ever got to like it so well at the widow's, where if you had to wash and eat on a plate and comb up and go to bed and get up regular and be forever bothering over a book or have Miss Watson pecking at you all the time. I didn't want to go back no more. I'd stopped cussing because the widow didn't like it, but now I took to it again because Pap had no objections. It's pretty good times up in the woods there. Take it all around. I want us to sit with that for just a minute, okay? We've got our ideas of Pap. We've got our ideas of the life that Huck Finn was kind of making there at the widow's. We also know that Huck is not the kind of guy that enjoys getting dressed up and being held down to a particular lifestyle. But his father's a drunk, and he's beating him, and he's not letting him go. So do we think Huck really does enjoy this, or do we think that Huck is just becoming complacent because he doesn't know that there's ever going to be another way for him out? Just keep that in the back of your mind. But by and by, Pap got too handy with his hickory, and I couldn't stand it. I was all over welts. He got to going away so much, too, and locking me in. And once he locked me in and was gone for 3 days. It was dreadful lonesome. I judged he had gotten drowned and wasn't ever going to get out anymore, and I was scared. I made up my mind I would fix up some way to leave. I'd tried to get out of that cabin many a time, but I couldn't find no way. There wasn't a window big enough for a dog to get through. I couldn't get up the chimbley. It was too narrow. The door was thick solid oak slabs. Pap was pretty careful to leave a knife or anything in the cabin when he was away. I reckon I had hunted the place over as much as 100 times. Well, it was most all the time of it because it was about only way to put in the time. But this time I found something at last. I found an old rusty wood saw without any handle. It was laid in between a rafter and the clapboards of the roof. I greased it up and I went to work. There was an old horse blanket nailed against the logs at the far end of the cabin behind the table to keep the wind from blowing through the chinks and putting the candle out. Well, I got under the table and raised the blanket and went to work to saw a section of the big bottom log out, big enough to let me through. Well, it was a good long job, but I wasn't getting towards the end of it when I heard Pap's gun in the woods. I got rid of the signs of my work and I dropped the blanket and hid my saw, and pretty soon Pap came in. Pap warn't in good humor. So he was his natural self. He said he was down to town and everything was going wrong. His lawyer said he reckoned he would win his lawsuit and get the money if they ever got started on the trial, but then there was ways to put it off a long time, and Judge Thatcher knowed how to do it. And he said people allowed there'd be another trial to get me away from him and give me the widow as my guardian, so they guessed I would win. It would win this time. Well, this shook me up considerable, because I didn't want to go back to the widows anymore and be so cramped up and civilized, as they call it. And then the old man got to cussing and cussed everything and everybody could think of, and then he cussed them all over again to make sure he hadn't skipped any, and after he polished it off with a general cuss all around, including a considerable parcel of people which he didn't know the names of, and so called them what's-his-names, and when he got to them, he went right along with his cussing. He said he would like to see the widow get me. He said he would watch out, and if they tried to come on such a game and he knowed of a place a 6 or 7 mile off, to stow me in, where they might hunt till they dropped and they couldn't find me. Well, that made me pretty uneasy again, but only for a minute. I reckoned I wouldn't stay on hand until he got the chance. So here, Huck is again showing us kind of ideally, his strength. This idea that even if Pap does try to do that, he's got the resourcefulness to find a way out. The old man made me go get the skiff and fetch things that he had got. There was a 50-pound sack of cornmeal and a side of bacon, ammunition, and a 4-gallon jug of whiskey, and an old book, 2 newspapers for wadding, besides some tow. I toted up a load and went back and sat down the bow on the skiff to rest. I thought it all over, and I reckoned I would walk off with the gun and some lines and take to the woods when I run away. I guess I wouldn't stay in one place, but just tramp right along across the country, mostly night times, and hunt and fish to keep alive and get so far away that the old man or the widow could never find me anymore. I judged it would saw out and leave that night if Pap got drunk enough, and I reckoned he would. I got so full of it I didn't notice how long I was staying till the old man hollered and asked me if I was sleeping or drowned. I got the things all up in the cabin, and then it was about dark. While I was cooking supper, the old man took a swig or two and got sort of warmed up and went to ripping again. He had been drunk over in town and laid in the gutter all night, and then he was a sight to look at. A body would have thought he was Adam. He was just all mud. Whenever his liquor begun to work, he most always went for the government. This time, he says, "Call this a government? Why, look at it and what it's like. Here's a law standing to take a man's son away from him, a man's own son, which he had all the trouble and the anxiety and all the expense of raising. Yes, just as that man had got a son raised at last, ready to go to work and begin to do something for him and give him a rest, the law up and goes for him. And they call that government. It ain't at all another. The law backs that old Judge Thatcher up and helps him keep me out of my property. Here's what the law does. The law takes a man worth $6,000 and upwards and jams an old trapper cabin like this and lets it go around in clothes that ain't fitting for a hog. They call that government. A man can't get his rights in government like this. Sometimes I have a mighty notion to leave the country for good and all. Yes, and I told him so. I told old Thatcher to his face. Lots of 'em heard me and can tell what I said. Says, for 2 cents, I'd leave the blamed country and never come near it again. Them's the words. I say, look at my hat. You call it a hat. The lid raises up and the rest of it goes down below my chin, and then it ain't tight like a hat at all. More like my head was shoved up through a gin of stovepipe. Look at it, says I. Such a hat for me to wear. One of the wealthiest men in this town if I could get my rights. Is that money really Pap's? He sure thinks it is. Oh, yes. This is a wonderful government, wonderful. Why, looky here. There was a free there from our high, a mulatter, most as white as a white man. He had the whitest shirt on you ever see, too, and the shiniest hat. And there ain't a man in town that's got as fine clothes as what he had. He had a gold watch and chain and silver-headed cane, the awfulest old gray-headed nabob in the state. And what do you think? They said he was a professor in college and could talk all kinds of languages, knowed everything, and that ain't the worst. They said he could vote when he was home. Well, that let me out. Thinks I, what's this country a coming to? It was election day and I was just about to go and vote myself if I weren't too drunk to get there. But when they told me that there was a state in this country where they let that vote, I draw it out. I says I'll never vote again. Them's the very words I said, and they all heard me, and the country remained right for me. I'll never vote again as long as I live. And to see a cool way of that, why, he wouldn't give me the road if I hadn't shoved him out the way. I says to people, why ain't this put up an auction and sold? That's what I want to know. What do you reckon they said? Why, they said he couldn't be sold till he was in the States 6 months, that he hadn't been here that long yet. There, now, that's a specimen. They call that a government that can't sell a free till he's been in the States 6 months. Here's a government that calls itself a government and lets on to be a government and thinks it's a government, yet got stock still for 6 whole months before it can take a hold of a prowling, thieving, infernal, white-shirted free. And before we move on, ask yourself if right now Twain is using satire. What is this white man going on and on about in his drunken state? Well, about a free man that's not like him, an educated free man. Remember, he was very upset with Huck for being educated, that he'd learned to read. Now he's looking at a man who is half black, and he thinks that he should be sold as a slave. But he's also angry that he's educated. What exactly is Twain trying to get us to look at here? I want you to just sit with that for a moment. Okay? Remember, this was written in 1885. Yeah, think on that. Remember satire? Look at your notes if you don't remember. Pap was going on, so he never noticed where his old limber legs was taking him to. So he went head over heels over a tub of salt pork and barked both shins, and the rest of the speech was all the hottest kind of language. Mostly hove at the government, though he gives the tub some too, all along here and there. He hopped around the cabin considerable, first on one leg and then on the other, holding first one shin and then the other, and at last he let out with his left foot all of a sudden and fetched the tub a rattling kick. But it weren't good judgment, because that was the boot that had a couple of his toes leaking out the front end of it. So now he raised a howl that fairly made about his hair raise, and down he went in the dirt and rolled there and held his toes and cussing that he'd done and laid over anything that he'd ever done previous. He said so his own self afterwards. He heard old Sawbury Hagan in his best days, and he said it laid over him too. But I reckon that was the sort of piling it on, maybe. So in his drunken state, after going on and on and on about this other man, he goes and messes his shins up on the tub and then tries to kick it to get back at it. Oh, Pap. Well, after supper, Pap took the jug, and he said he'd had enough whiskey there for 2 drunks and 1 delirium tremens. That was always his word. I judged that he would be blind drunk in about an hour, and then I would steal the key or saw myself out, one to other. He drank and tumbled down his blankets by and by, and luck didn't run my way. He didn't go sound asleep, but was uneasy. He groaned and moaned and thrashed about this way and that for a long time. At last I got so sleepy I couldn't keep my eyes open all I could do, and so before I knowed it, I was about sound asleep and the candle burning. I don't know how long I was asleep, but all of a sudden there was an awful scream and I was up. There was Pap, looking wild and skipping around every which way, yelling about snakes. He said they was crawling up his legs, and he couldn't jump and scream, and he said he had one bit him on the cheek, but I couldn't see no snakes. He started running around the cabin and hollering, "Take him off! Take him off! He's biting me on the neck!" I never see a man look so wild in the eyes. And pretty soon he's all fagged out and fell down panting. This means that he was all messed up. Then he rolled over and over wonderful fast, kicking things every which way and striking and grabbing at the air with his hands and screaming and saying there were devils a hold of him. He worn out by and by, and he laid still a while, moaning. Then he laid stiller and didn't make a sound. I could hear the owls and the wolves away off in the woods, and it seemed terrible still. He was laying over by the corner. By and by he raised up part way and listened with his head on one side, and he says very low, "Tramp. Tramp, tramp. That's the dead. Tramp, tramp, tramp. They're coming after me, but I won't go. Oh, they're here. Don't touch me. Don't. Hands off. They're cold. Let go. Oh, let a poor devil alone." And then he went down on all fours and crawled off begging them to let him alone. And he rolled himself up in his blanket, wallowing under the old pine table, still a-begging. And then he went to crying, and I could hear him through the blanket. What's going on with Pap? By and by, he rolled out and he jumped on his feet looking wild, and he see me and went for me. He chased me around and around the place with a clasp knife, calling me the angel of death and saying he would kill me and he wouldn't come for me, and then I couldn't come for him no more. I begged and told him I was only Huck, but he laughed such a screechy laugh and roared and cussed and kept on chasing me. And once when I was short dodged under his arm, he made a grab at me and got me in the jacket by my shoulders, and I thought I was gone. But I slid out of the jacket quick as lightning, and I saved myself, and pretty soon he was all tired out and dropped down with his back against the door, and he wouldn't rest a minute and then kill me. He put his knife under him and said he would sleep and get strong, and then he would see who was who. So we dozed off pretty soon. By and by, I got the old split-bottom chair and clumb up as easy as I could not to make any noise and got down the gun. I slipped the ramrod down to make sure that it was loaded, and then I laid it across the turnip barrel, pointing it towards Pap, and sat down behind it, wait for him to stir. And how slow and still the time did drag along. So here at the end of chapter 6, Huck's sitting there with a gun pointed at his father, waiting for him to wake up. What's going to happen next? What do you think about Pap now? In your Schoology response, guys, that's exactly what you're going to be taking a look at. I look forward to seeing you guys on Monday. Have a great weekend. Don't forget to read.